We've got a number of questions, guys. I'm going to go for another 10 minutes with questions. That won't get us through all of them, but it'll get us through a couple. And the remaining questions we'll post written answers to online when we put the video of this presentation up next week. If I can go to the first question then, goes to lift planning and geotechnical testings. Can I ask the panel, when should you be doing a lift plan and when is a geotechnical test required before a lift?
When is a lift plan required? Well, I think the industry often coins between lift plans, lift study, etc. Before every lifting operation, a plan of some sort is undertaken, whether it's documented or on a template, or whether it's documented in the swims, or whether it's documentation in the crew in the pre-start. There is some form of planning that takes place. The truck will come in here, the crane will set up here, it'll pick, it'll slew, it'll place it over there. There is no hard and fast answer as to when a documented lift plan is required. There's certainly industry practice, and there's a bit of direction there in the Queensland Code of Practice as well as some other documentation. Me personally, the more information available and not get complacent is only going to improve the safety of the operation. So I personally like to see lift plans used as frequently as possible in a documented sense. A certain documented lift plan may in fact cover a range of lifts. So it might be setting up a 200-ton crane beside an excavation or something, and they might be laying pipe, and potentially that lift plan will address the maximum or worst load case in terms of capacity and ground capacity as well as crane capacity. And there might be a number of sundry lifts that can be covered under that assessment.
The criteria talks about a lift plan and that, but I mean, it comes down to, as Mick just said, then really the system itself and what the actual company system has dictated when they actually require a plan, and then we sort of go into the detail. But I think the overarching comment there really is about, based on the level of risk, would be a determining factor that we'd be expecting to have a lift plan in place.
Can I go to training requirements, guys? We've talked a lot about people being competent or trained or skilled in particular aspects of lift planning and the execution of a lift. Can I get you just to run through what sorts of qualifications you'd expect people to be holding to undertake some of these key activities that we've talked about today?
Obviously, with the lift plan process itself, or the qualifications, obviously the manufacturer would be the key component or starting point there, based on the manufacturer's requirements for the actual crane, and then the actual persons and the crane operator, dogman, rigger, etc., would be a key component to be all involved in that. And you'd be looking at obviously them being or having some experience in the use of that particular crane as well, because as we know, there's a whole different range of different sizes of cranes, and just because you have a crane license doesn't mean you'd be competent to actually undertake or carry out that lift plan.
For your high-risk work license, for legislative requirements, there's training components in there, training the crane operator to how to size the timber mats and how to look at the ground conditions when he set up the cranes. One level down below the legislative requirements, there's the Queensland Code of Practice that have specific sections in there talking about ground conditions and provide guidance when the geotechnical engineer is required. And also another level below that, SICA has the guidance note on ground bearing pressure and crane stability, and have a lot of the member videos as the crane mat one you see before. That's all available from our SICA website.
Great. No, thank you, guys. I think that's clarified that quite a bit. Can we talk a little bit about matting? What are the technical load requirements for deciding between the use of timber bearers and fabricated steel mats?
Ultimately, it comes down to the design of the mat. What I would say is that when a crane's got removable counterweights, more often than not, there's support trucks with those counterweights. So more often than not, there's mats that will come with those counterweights. Now, we're seeing now cranes as small as 35 or 40 tonne with a removable counterweight. And if you increase in crane sizes, certainly, for me personally, 100, 130 tonne above, be abnormal to be operating on timber in lieu of a steel mat. The fabricated steel mat, there is no substitute for the security and support you get from that. A 50, 60 tonne truck mount crane, I don't think it's unreasonable to be operating on timbers. 70 to 80 tonne crane could be each way. So really it's understanding the loads through there and the surface you're on. And as was touched in the video, the timber may provide a surface area that's suitable for the ground pressure, but has the timber got the structural strength and particularly the shear capacity to handle that load? And a 200 tonne crane might have, a 60 to 70 tonne outrigger load. So one would say that's fairly high for the range for timber, and that we should be using fabricated steel mats or a composite style mat.
And continuing on the theme of using timbers, how many layers should you expect to see in a pigsty stack?
A minimum 2. I mean, that video showed some great footage of some well set up mats, but ultimately the outrigger foot, unlike a fabricated steel mat, the top layer of the fabricated steel mat is often a steel plate. It's transferring load through to the UCs or the SHS members below it. On the timber, if that top layer of timber is not picked up by the actual outrigger foot, then it's redundant. It's not actually transferring the load. So the upper layer is then built and extremulated, widened as it comes down the stack. Personally, it's a minimum 2 to transfer the load across a suitable width, unless of course the width you're operating in is deemed to maybe 400mm might be adequate. But a 400mm mat is a very narrow mat, so you'd normally see a bottom layer of 4 to 6 timbers, and you'll have a secondary layer on top to assist in transferring the load to those outside timbers.
Craig, might go to you on this one, and a bit of a broader question. What are the major differences in state legislative requirements and licensing arrangements across Australia?
There's not a great difference in relation to licensing requirements. I mean, if we look at the legislation and the codes, I mean, they all require the same license for the crane operators, etc., for how they operate, and then it really comes down to a risk-based process for some of the legislation. They're not as specific in some areas about, unlike Queensland, where we have a specific code of practice. Some of the other states are not as clear. We mentioned the Safe Work Guide, which is very good. It's quite clear on sort of some expectations, but when you go to some of the other states, they have a bit of detail in the actual their plant code of practice as opposed to a specific mobile code crane of practice. So, but ultimately the difference between all jurisdictions, there's minimal difference when it comes down to the safe use and the practices about how we use and set up mobile cranes, and the licensing requirements go along with it.
We still do have some questions left, but as I was saying earlier, we might do those in writing and provide a written response to those when we post the video up online next week. So I'm going to wrap it up today. Thank you to all of our presenters for an excellent overview of what is quite a complex subject matter. I think we've seen some really great examples of things that people can do and take away some really tangible insights into how we can do better in this area, that our analysis through our Hazard 2020 campaign is showing that there is a need for improvement in this space across industry. Thank you everyone for your time today. Really do appreciate everyone coming and tuning into this presentation. We will see you at the next OFSC webinar in about a month or so's time. Thanks kindly and stay safe on site, guys. Bye.